Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do this drawing of waves in colored pencil. Could be fun. Let's have a look. I'm going to be working on sandpaper. Colored pencils work really well on sandpaper or sanded paper, and I haven't done that in a while. So we're going to do this little drawing. My main drawing tools will be Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and the sandpaper I'm using is 1000 grit waterproof sandpaper. If you have something like an artist quality sanded paper like UArt or something like that, that'll definitely work. But this fine sandpaper also works really well as a medium for colored pencils. The size of the paper is a little bit less than usual, 5 times 10 inches or so, I'm not really sure. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be a slightly smaller drawing, but I just felt like practicing drawing some water and waves. Now notice that I started by drawing this crest of the wave, because there's going to be like a large wave in the middle and then some smaller waves and ripples here and there in the background. But I started by drawing the line of the crest of the wave with a white colored pencil, and my approach is kind of similar to when I'm drawing landscapes. I first try to define the line of the horizon, and then I start adding some other elements. But here I started by drawing this wave, or at least the top part of the wave, and then I moved on to the background. I drew some indications of foamy splashing water. Now some of that is going to be lost when I start working on the background and blending it, but that's okay, I'm going to bring it back. One of the reasons why I like doing that is not only to give myself the idea about the shape of the wave, but also because it's going to be easier to bring back those lightest lights, those lightest whites, if I put down the white colored pencil first. So I'm going to use a variety of bluish tones here, bluish and some greenish tones. I picked up this turquoise pencil, and I'm going to use that a little bit. Then I'm going to use some ultramarine, and then I'm going to mix it up with some sky blue, as well as some Prussian blue, and maybe even some green. We'll see. So one of the things that you'll notice, and this is a huge difference between the sandpaper and regular paper, is that I'm going to be doing a lot of blending, dry blending without any solvents, and I normally use tortillons for that. I just make these tortillons myself, roll them into a tip, and just blend. Now as I'm blending, you'll notice that the colors are mixing a little bit, but because the sandpaper is so rough, it's wearing down the pencils a little bit, and it's not so easy to cover large areas quickly. You could do that more easily with pastels, obviously. With colored pencils, it's a little bit slower, but it still works a lot better than it would on regular paper. So tortillons do work as blending tools with colored pencils and sandpaper, but you have to kind of learn some of their limitations. Sometimes it's a better idea to fill in the tooth of the paper and to mix it in by layering. Sometimes it's a good idea to blend. Here I'm actually going to be able to use that grayish, dark grayish background and mix it in with my tones, and that's going to help me create the color that I want In some other cases I would want to fill in the tooth of the paper entirely. At the top I put some darker tones like a Prussian blue, and here also around the middle I put some greenish tones. I'm going to add a little bit more of that Prussian blue, which is a dark blue, at the top. So basically I want a variety of bluish and greenish tones. Here and there I'm just drawing a bit more of those suggestions of waves using that dark blue, and I'm even going over some of them with some black. One of the things that you'll notice when you're using black on sandpaper is that it actually works a lot better than on regular paper. It's easier to get whichever color that you're working with, it's easier to get it to look darker just by using black. I'm not really sure why that works so much better on sanded paper, but it does. On sandpaper, colored pencils do blend, whereas on regular paper you can just sort of layer them and create an illusion of blending. Here it works a little bit better because the sandpaper grinds on the material, on the pigment, and you can move it around more easily and blend it more easily. But back to my drawing process. So I created some suggestions of waves, some movement in the water, and I softened that a little bit with a brush. So in addition to the Tortillions, I'm also going to be using brushes here and there, but mostly Tortillions. Now here I picked up that white colored pencil again, and I decided to draw a few more waves in the distance using that white colored pencil. Just a few more foamy crests of some smaller waves in the back. But of course I'm going to be mostly focusing on the wave in the middle of my drawing, and that's where I'm going to have most of that foamy splashing water. I am by no means an expert in drawing water or waves. When I draw things like that, each and every one of those drawings is a learning experience for me as well. But I do feel like maybe some of this will be useful to other people, especially to beginners and maybe those who haven't yet tried drawing with colored pencils on sanded paper, because it's a really completely different experience in comparison to drawing on regular paper. They kind of behave a little bit more like pastel pencils rather than colored pencils. And the reason why I picked these Polychromos colored pencils is because they're just of very good quality. They're easy to sharpen, they hold the tip pretty good, they're vibrant, and they stick to this surface pretty well, so I hardly have to use any fixative at all. So I don't have to worry about the color change or anything, or I don't have to worry about smudging. So that's another good thing. So you can see I'm kind of blending a variety of colors here in the background and just creating some suggestions of darker waves here and there, and some lighter tops of those waves, the crests of those waves here and there where the water is splashing and foaming a little bit. But the main thing is that I'm combining a couple of different colors and adding some turquoise tones, some ultramarine tones, and some darker bluish and greenish tones, so that I could get something that kind of looks like sea water, ocean water, and waves splashing around. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the left. I'm going to do the same thing on the right side of the top part of my drawing, which is also the background. Here and there I might add a few of those waves which are splashing around a little bit more, and just trying to create something that kind of looks like waves, kind of looks like movement of water, and making sure that these waves are getting a little bit larger as we approach the foreground. So here I'm going to go back to this main subject, as it were, the focus of my drawing, which is this wave in the middle. And I'm going to go back to this edge, this foamy crest, and I'm going to try to bring back some of that splashing water. I started out by drawing this outline, but during the blending and shading process, some of these details were lost. I'm going to be bringing them back, and like I said, it's a little bit easier for me to do that once I put down some white underneath other colors first. But this Polychromos white color pencil is pretty strong. It creates really strong highlights, so I'm still able to create those splashy white details and create a lot of contrast in the process. Now here the wave is kind of the top of the wave, the top of the crest of the wave is foamy and splashing, but it's kind of spilling over as the waves are colliding and moving. It's kind of spilling over to one side, and it's spilling over more on the right side. And I'm going to try to capture that movement. First I drew the top of that crest and I blended it a little bit, and now I'm going to use a little bit more of that light turquoise color just underneath that crest. This is an area which is usually a bit lighter and a bit more transparent, because more light from above is coming through. So I'm going to try to capture that three-dimensional appearance of the wave by adding some greenish and turquoise tones, but also trying to make that part of the wave a little bit lighter. And then as it goes down towards the bottom of the wave, towards that trough, I'm going to be adding some darker tones and some darker values, because I want that to look like a shadow area where the crest of the wave is casting a bit of shadow downwards, and also where the water is less transparent because there is a greater mass of water there and we can't really see through that water. So I'm blending this. I want to blend this a bit more thoroughly. I don't want to leave too much texture there. And while at the bottom, as you can see, I can leave some suggestions of shapes, and I can maybe make sure that that area is a little bit darker. So right now the top of that wave, the crest, doesn't look very convincing, but the reason why it doesn't look that great is because I need to add a little bit more splashing water and a little bit more foam to it. And I also need to kind of make sure that I add some colors which I've used elsewhere. So I need to create some sort of a balance in terms of colors, and I need to make sure that the color that appears in one part of my drawing is present in the other part of my drawing, at least in a small amount. So we're going to have a little bit of that turquoise everywhere, but it's mostly going to be there just under that crest of the wave, where the water is kind of more transparent and a little bit lighter. I'm shamelessly using this black colored pencil to add some more of these shadow areas, and like I said, on sandpaper, adding black on top of other colors to make them darker does work, and I don't see a problem with it. It looks pretty good. And at the bottom, where the wave is kind of spilling over, we're going to have some water that is kind of similar in color and value to the water behind the wave, but there's going to be a little bit more foam and a bit more of those waves in front. So I hope that my explanations will be useful to somebody. Like I said, I'm not really an expert on these things, but I'm just telling you how I see this, how I'm interpreting what I'm looking at. And by the way, for my reference, I used a couple of paintings of seascapes, and I just decided to create a wave of my own. I hope that it'll look good. So here at the top I'm starting to add a bit more splashing water so that I can make that top part of the wave a bit more convincing looking. One of the things that you'll also notice about working with colored pencils on sandpaper is that it will wear down your pencils a little bit more quickly, but it's fine because these Polychromos pencils that I'm using are harder, a little bit harder anyway, and you're also filling in the tooth of the paper a little bit faster than on regular paper, so it's not really a huge problem, although you have to expect the fact that your pencils will last a little bit less when you use them on this type of paper. And like I said, this is just regular sandpaper that you can buy in a hardware store. It's a waterproof sandpaper, which is a fine 1000 grit sandpaper, and it has a very fine tooth. It's very pleasant to work with colored pencils. It can also work with pastels. Some people don't like this idea of using these cheaper materials because they say they're not archival. This material is actually pretty archival because it's very sturdy and very durable, and it's also waterproof, so moisture won't damage it. The only problem that you might be concerned about is the change in color because of the acid content, because I'm not sure if it's acid-free. It's probably not. In fact, most papers, even some artist quality papers, are not entirely acid-free. But I'm not too worried about that. Like I said, this is not a huge problem for me. I'm not too concerned about what my drawings will look like several decades after I'm dead. If there's a slight color change, I'm okay with that. That's not going to be a problem. And so now I'm drawing these foamy streaks under the or on the inside of that crest of the wave. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was that they didn't look really good initially, because one of the things that I had to do was I needed to make sure that I kind of defined them a little bit better in terms of their edge. I wanted to make the edge a little bit cleaner so that this foamy part looks a little bit more defined in relation to the rest of the background. Now, another thing that I wanted to achieve is, because the wave is kind of curving towards us, one part of those foamy lines, or the top part of those foamy lines, is going to be in the shadow. So I needed to draw them with a darker pencil, but a pencil that is still lighter than the color of the water of the wave. So I picked a sky blue, I believe it was. Let me just check. I did use a sky blue, which is kind of bluish, but still a little bit darker than the white, and kind of the part of those foamy lines which are showing up from under the wave and catching more light from above. I did those with a white color pencil because they're a little bit lighter and they're coming out from the shadow. So I'm hoping that my explanation makes sense, and I added even more shadow to some parts of the wave. And I'm also adding some other tones. But like I said, one of the key things for me was realizing that I needed to keep these edges a little bit cleaner and a little bit more defined so that I could achieve a more natural look. Not really sure why that is so, because I guess here this foam is kind of flowing in small streaks, whereas at the top of the crest it's a lot more dispersed and a lot more foamy, and I can get away with drawing edges that are less defined and less clean than the edges here. Now, as I'm approaching the bottom of the drawing, where the wave kind of flattens, I'm going to be drawing some more of those foamy streaks. But here they look a little bit more like parallel lines. It's a little bit more difficult to discern the movement of the water, so I'm just going to try to simplify it and approximate a little bit so that I can get something that kind of looks realistic. But I've done 3/4 of the drawing, and I'm now moving on to this final part. And here, this part is going to be slightly different, because this is the foamy part of the wave, where the wave is kind of spilling over onto the other side. So I'm going to have to use a little bit more white here. But here's the trick again, I can't leave it completely white because it's facing away from the light source. It's spilling over, and the crest at the top, the foamy part at the top, needs to be lighter than this. So even though this is going to contain a little bit of white here and there, I need to make sure that it's darker. I'm also drawing this shadow area under that foamy part which is spilling over, and I'm also adding some greenish tones to it as well, so that I could stay consistent with the colors that I've used elsewhere in my drawings. And I'm also adding a touch of black here and there for the darkest bits. So mostly a combination of these two darker colors, the dark blue and the dark green, but mostly the Prussian blue and just a touch of black here and there. So here for this foamy part, I mixed in a couple of different colors. I used a bit of white as my basis, and I blended that, and I added a bit of sky blue, a bit of ultramarine, a bit of turquoise, and I kind of tried blending that so that I can get some variation in terms of color, just so that it would look a little bit foamy, like we can discern some shapes in there, but at the same time it needed to be a little bit darker than the lightest foam at the top, because it's in the shadow, it's facing away from the light source. So now I feel like I'm getting somewhere. I'm starting to create something that kind of looks like a wave spilling over to the other side, and I'm also trying to break it a little bit into smaller segments, define its shape a little bit more, and adding some darker bits here and there where maybe that foamy water is kind of spilling every which way, and we can see through it. So I'm adding some of those darker bits where we can maybe see a little bit more of that background, which is the shadow side of the wave. And I'm also adding some lighter details here and there, as well as some of these darker details where the shadow area is coming through, because I don't want to make it completely opaque. I want to break it up a little bit and make it look a bit more foamy. I'm also trying to create some suggestions of some splashing water even in that shadow side of the wave, so I'm trying to create a bit of variation in terms of value, and I'm adding some more splashing bits here around the top of the crest where the water is kind of spilling over. And now at the bottom I'm going to have to clean up this area a little bit, adding a few more of these foamy streaks, and I'm going to have to add a few more of those on the right side as well, but when these are in the shadow, I normally use a sky blue, because it's bluish and it's just a little bit darker than white, which is exactly what I need. So now I'm going back and trying to refine some of the areas in this shadow part of the wave so that it can make a little bit more sense. I don't really know what all of this looks like to you. I hope that you like it. I have done a few seascapes on my channel, not too many of them. I mostly like to draw trees and foliage and things like that. So I have a lot of those. I should probably draw more water, if not for no other reason than just for practice, but I hope that this will turn out fine and that you like it. If you want to see much longer videos than this one, much longer tutorials of my videos, you should check out my Patreon, because I have a lot of content there. I have dozens of full-length videos. And on my channel here, of course, I have all kinds of videos, not just landscapes, but I also have a lot of portraits and other stuff. I'm just trying to finish this right side or right corner of the drawing. I'm using a brush here and there to soften some of these lines a bit, because they don't need to be quite as well defined. I'm trying to make some of them a little bit blurry, and just adding some more of that foam at the bottom. I'm going to make sure that it's not all of equal value. Some of it is going to be a little bit lighter, some of it is going to be a little bit more subdued. I'm using a brush to soften the contrast in some areas, and maybe to make some areas a little bit darker where I need a bit of shadow without actually spoiling my details and the texture. But most of the time I use these tortillons to refine the details and to do some blending. Here and there I'm adding a few touches of some foamy and maybe sparkling water here at the bottom. That I think will add a lot to the realism of this foreground area. But these are just, I think, some of the finishing touches right now, because my scene is almost complete. I'm just going to add a bit of greenish tones here and there. I do like that transition between the greenish and the bluish tones, so I used 6 or 7 different colored pencils, I think. And finally, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of shadow here just above the crest of the wave, so that I can enhance that contrast a little bit, so that that wave would stand out even more against the background. And those are the finishing touches. Just a little bit more turquoise here, and I'm almost done. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like my content, and don't forget to give me a like and comment. Let me know what you think. Feel free to interact, and also, once again, don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to see longer videos. I put my signature in the lower left corner, and now the drawing is done. I want to thank you for being patient and watching this. I'm going to see you in the next video. Bye for now.